My name is Joey Ito. I'm the director of the MIT Media Lab. When I first got here about 6 years ago now, my background was I was an internet entrepreneur and I was also an activist. And the Media Lab, which is now 31 years old, had a long history, and it's a very peculiar and interesting place. And one of the first things I did was to try to figure out how my values and the values of the Media Lab overlapped, and whether there was sort of a common theme or principles that we shared. And we talked about this at faculty meetings, and I've been wanting to write a book for a long time, and I realized that writing a book about the principles of the Media Lab as well as my own principles and telling stories about how these principles affect our lives and affect our futures would be a good thing. I had a book agent who connected me with Jeff Howe, my co-author, who's a Wired journalist and author of the book Crowdsourcing. But and the original title of the book was actually something like The Principles of the Survival Guide to the Future or something like that. But the idea was that a lot of books talked about how the world was unpredictable and chaotic and the internet was changing everything and everything was disruptive, but it didn't really tell you what you should do about it. So one of the purposes of the book is to help you kind of think about how to think about the future. And so we have 9 principles, and some of them sound somewhat contradictory. So, and each chapter is one of the principles. So one of my favorites is practice over theory, and a lot of my faculty didn't like that. But I think it's a Yogi Berra, but there's an old quote that says, in theory, practice and theory are the same. And in fact, the Media Lab, in the early days, people used to say demo or die instead of publish or perish. And the idea was that you needed to build things in order to learn about them, in order to talk about them. And by building things, different people from different disciplines could work together. When I got here, I added deploy. We changed it to deploy or die. And when I was explaining this to President Obama at lunch, the president said, well, maybe you should work on the messaging. And I imagined what it would sound like to him, deploy or die. So we changed it to just deploy. But the idea about practice over theory is that you learn a lot more. You learn facts from doing things than just theorizing. So that's one of our key messages. And another one is compasses over maps. Because when the territory is changing and it's really complex, sometimes the cost of creating a map or the accuracy that you can have in a map, which is really the planning, is very limited. And so what you really need is a compass heading. For instance, when I first met the YouTube folks, actually when you look at 2005, YouTube was a dating site with video. And then later it was Flickr with video. And it took them a while, and finally they got to be the video embed site for MySpace. And that took off because Google Video at the time, which was the most powerful, didn't want to work with MySpace. But they always knew they wanted to be a video site. And when they came out, and if the first one, which was dating site with video, if they had just stuck to that, they would never have been successful. But their ability to navigate through and eventually become the largest video site, I think, is a good example of compasses over maps. And another one that I love is disobedience over compliance. We recently announced a disobedience award, which got a few raised eyebrows around here. But the idea is that whether it's the scientific method, which is questioning authority, thinking for yourself, whether it's democracy, which is questioning the status quo, or the evolution of laws, which is the famous quote, and I won't get this exactly right, of Martin Luther King, which is that we all have a moral imperative to follow just laws, but a moral imperative to disobey unjust laws. And it's that disobedience of unjust laws, against unjust laws, that freed India under Mahatma Gandhi, or created the civil rights movement, and maybe more recently allowed gay and lesbian marriages and things like that. So I think that disobedience over compliance, when I think about the Media Lab and how we design the lab, I like to think about the lab as being disobedience robust, a place where people can be disobedient and can question authority, and that those sorts of disobedient behaviors makes us stronger rather than weaker. So there are other principles in the book, but we tell stories about sort of the future of manufacturing, the future of synthetic biology, Bitcoin, blockchain, to try to illustrate these principles and hopefully show people and how to think about maybe how their own life or their own businesses should be.